Welcome. I'm Dee Wolfsbane, and this is Story of the Game, a podcast where I take hours of real Dungeons & Dragons adventures and weave them into short narratives for your entertainment. Last time on the penultimate episode of the Disappearing Debacle Arc, Ferox and Yenna fought cultists in the Vehsens household before being captured. The rest of the party woke the next morning with no knowledge of this, but soon found out that Meba was gone. The Uglon's journal was still in his office. They searched for clues in his office until they uncovered a trap door that led down to tunnels in the mountain. They went to get Ferox, only to find her missing before having to race back to the Silver Scythe and down into the tunnels. Traversing the passages in the mountain, some of the party got blown up before they finally ran into Ferox, Yenna, and Sagho, the previously missing leader of the Isarakor monastery. Ferox told them of how, to escape the cultists, she had sparked Yenna's memory of the song they'd sung around the mountain, which drew a cultist guard close before she froze him with her ice breath. They got the keys and got out. Sagho, who was still severely injured, left to get the monks for reinforcements, while the group decided to continue on, unable to wait since the cultist ceremony had already begun. Will they be able to save the Vehsens family in time? Let's find out as we jump into the final episode in the Disappearing Debacle Arc of Story of the Game. Let me tell you a story of love and loss. The lost city of D, a satyr, and a blood hunter. Survived against this huge kraken. Mykolis, the trickster. Of wild magic. Of a plague that swept through. Dragons, I say. The orb of tides. Of a hopeless guild. There was this bard. And this is what happened. Now that Ferox and Yenna had reunited with the group, they pressed onwards, towards the cult. Sagho had gone off to get the monks, but the cultists who had been guarding the cell had told them that the cult ceremony had already begun, and the group decided that they couldn't wait for monk reinforcements. If they were going to save any of the Vehsens, they had to end this themselves. So, Clotho sent her eagle familiar Zeus up ahead to check that the way was clear. Zeus flew through the tunnels without issue before coming to the end of the line, a closed door. Knowing that the way was clear, the group rushed ahead to the door and listened through it. They heard chanting in the infernal tongue coming through from another chamber. The cult was performing some sort of ceremony, and the group needed to get in there and save Yenna's family, and they needed to do it quickly. They had a hurried discussion about how to approach the cult. Should they knock down the door? Should they stealth in? Though, to be fair, the stealth in option wasn't really an option. It was pretty much non-existent for this group. They were a much more in-your-face, let's kick some ass type of group. And because of that, their planning lasted all of 30 seconds. Which actually was probably a good thing, considering it gave the cult less time to do their ritual. So, the brute force plan was a go. Kimi would break down the door, Clotho, Oriana, and Carrick, our wizard, warlock, and sorcerer, would rush in first, and they'd be hastily followed by Lucifer, Grim, Kimi, Ferox, and Yenna, who'd all have their weapons drawn, ready for the ensuing battle. With the plan now in place, and one final deep breath, they plunged into the heart of the mountain, into the center of the cult. Kimi kicked down the door, setting off an alarm trap that they hadn't noticed, but it mattered little. The door's cracks echoed through into the next chamber, announcing their presence. But unexpectedly, they didn't burst in right on top of the cult. Instead, they entered into another narrow tunnel with steps that led down into another chamber. With Zeus leading the way, they ran at full speed, and at the base of the stairs, they were met with a scene that they weren't quite prepared for. A heavy sulphurous fume clung to the air in the 50-foot wide cavern that opened up before them. The black ichor of devils was scattered everywhere, as if there had been an explosion in the middle of this cavern, which had splayed them all out. In the center of this large chamber was a huge fire burning in a pit, the epicenter of the devil explosion. Behind the fire was a circle of 6 cultists chanting in the dark infernal tongue, holding their hands aloft to a man who stood in the middle of the six. The man in the middle was partially translucent, as if his body was still forming, and the cultist chants were summoning him forth from another plane of existence. And there he stood, in the flesh, the fierce core whose body was covered completely in white core tattoos, all over his arms, all over his face, the person who had been said to have died while vanquishing the cult in times of old. But now it was clear. This core hadn't died vanquishing the cult. He himself had been the cult's leader. And when he had been stopped, the cult had been stopped. There before them, in the center of the 6 chanting cultists, stood Ulagon Vehsen, one of the 3 founders of Sagho, reincarnated. But that wasn't the only shock to the group's system. Behind the fire and the circle of summoning cultists were 9 core tied up to the cavern wall. These core's wrists were chained above their heads and fastened to the wall. 9 core, all of whom were from the Vehsen tribe. The cult was using Vehsen blood to reincarnate a Vehsen of long past, Ulagon. The 3 Vehsen sacrifices on the rightmost side hung limply, dead from one stab through the heart. Blood still poured down their front, soaking their leathers and skin. A cult fanatic stood before the next living Vehsen, with a bronze dagger in one hand and a spell page in the other. The spell page was familiar to the group. It was the page that had been tucked into the back of Ulagon Vehsen's journal. It was the page that Mebo had said was to banish fiends using the dagger in the book. And right now, it was being used to summon Ulagon. The cult fanatic stood before the 4th Vehsen sacrifice, who was unknown to the group, just like the 3 that were already deceased. But the next 5 Vehsen sacrifices, the group knew very well. The first were Nithni's grandparents, who'd been kind enough to accept Ferox into their family home. Beside them was Nithni, tears in her eyes, helpless, scared. Next to her was Yamin, hurt and angry, but unable to do anything about it. And the last Vehsen, the one on the far left side, was Yenna. "That can't be Yenna. Yenna's with us," my player said. With a somber, expectant look of a DM who knew that her players were about to freak out, I replied, "You do indeed see Yenna tied up on the far wall. And you turn back to check, and yes, Yenna is also standing there in the middle of your group. So you look back to the wall of the soon-to-be sacrifices, and Yenna is definitely tied up there, barely conscious. And that's when the Yenna in your midst starts to smirk. An evil, excited smirk. And she speaks, but it's not with her voice, though the voice is familiar to you. It's one you've heard many times. In the silver scythe, and it says, "Well, this certainly has been fun. Took you long enough." And with that, the Yenna that was standing in the middle of the group, the one that Ferox had saved from the cell, the one who hadn't known the song she'd shared with the Dragonborn on the ledge around the mountain, under the midnight full moon, that Yenna dropped an illusion. And her form transformed back into its original state, that of an ostentatiously dressed bard who had a finger on the pulse of everything that happened in Sagho. Mebotova now stood amongst them. With that, the fight commenced. Mebo pulled a potion from his belt and gulped it in one. A magical protection seemed to coat his body, and he drew his rapier and dagger while inspiring his fellow cultists with encouragement. Clotho, wanting to stop the ritual, ignored Mebo completely and cast sleep over the cultists in the center, causing 2 of the 6 in the circle to immediately drop into a magical slumber. At the same time, Kumi turned on Mebo, and so too did the others, including Ferox, all of them wanting a piece of the bard that had orchestrated all of this, wanting to tear him apart for what he had done. Mebo, though, was nimble and dodged many of the incoming attacks, and those that managed to strike him were diminished because of the potion he'd drunk.
"Is that the best you've got?"
he said with a smirk still firmly on his face. Meanwhile, the cult fanatic by the far wall began an incantation, charging the bronze dagger and the core in front of him with devilish energies, preparing to sacrifice the 4th Vehsen, the only one left who the group didn't know personally. The other 4 cultists who were still awake in the circle around Ulagon engaged the intruders. Of those 4, one was Layla, the wizard who had directed them to take the book to Mebo in the first place, causing them to deliver the page with the summoning ritual right into the cult's greedy hands. Layla cast her spells, while 2 of the other cultists drew their scimitars, and the 4th, a cult priest, created a spiritual hammer of shimmering purple energy that swung madly at whomever was closest. As all of this was happening, another enemy moved. One the group didn't expect to be able to take effect in the material plane. But the summoning had already started to bind him here, and even if he wasn't at full strength yet, Ulagon Vehsen was capable of joining the fray. He cast mage armor on himself for protection as he stepped forward, ready to destroy those who had dared intrude upon his awakening. Seeing that, the party realized that they couldn't focus on Mebo alone. Ulagon was going to destroy them if they gave him the chance. So, some of the group moved away from Mebo to engage Ulagon and the other cultists, while the others kept attacking the bard, especially Ferox. She couldn't let go of the fact that he had captured Yenna and her family, and that he'd even had the gall to impersonate her love directly. Mebo's attempt to polymorph the Dragonborn into some harmless animal was shrugged off, as Ferox summoned a flaming scimitar yet again and slashed at the potion-protected bard. Grim, Clotho, and Kumi all moved farther into the cavern to deal with the other threats they faced. Grim was able to cut down one of the cultists with his newly purchased hand axe, chopping him down where he stood. "I did something!" he exclaimed, excited to finally be of use to the group in battle. Meanwhile, Kumi shot arrows at Ulagon as Clotho flung a firebolt, both of which hurt the awakening core. But at that moment, by the far wall, the cult fanatic had finished his incantation, and he plunged the bronze dagger into the chest of the 4th Vehsen sacrifice. The effect was immediate. The Vehsen's life energy was siphoned from their body and floated along ethereal currents all the way to Ulagon. Ulagon closed his eyes as the energy surged through him, bolstering him, allowing him to become more physically present in the material plane, powered by the sacrifice of his very own descendant. Stepping to the side with an evil grin and reinvigorated power, Ulagon said,
"That feels better. Let's try this now."
Ulagon lined up Clotho, Kumi, and Grim before waving his hands with a bit of fur and amber. Electrical energy surged from the materials, and Ulagon released this lightning bolt, which only stopped when it impacted the far cavern wall, tossing shards of rock and rubble into the air and scorching all in its path. Though Kumi and Clotho managed to only be nicked by the attack, Clotho was still injured from the trap explosion that had happened in the tunnels, and she would definitely fall to another hit like that. Grim, on the other hand, hadn't been able to dodge out of the way in time, and took the full brunt of the electrical bolt to the chest. He crumbled to the ground, unconscious, bleeding out. Lucifer quickly jumped in to heal Grim and get him back on his feet, while Carrick and Ferox continued to try to tear Mebo to shreds. The bard had taken a few hits, but he was still strong and attacked the two with surprising speed, His rapier seemed to be empowered with psychic energy that tore through their minds. Having seen the new power that Ulagon had gained from the fourth sacrifice, Oriana, Kumi, and Clotho now all turned their attention to stop Ulagon and his summoning. As the cult fanatic moved over to one of Nithini's grandparents, Oriana shot 2 green bolts of eldritch energy at him, and Kumi loosed his arrows at the cult fanatic's arm, which held the bronze dagger. Clotho used this opportunity of destabilization to call Zeus down from above. The familiar managed to snatch the loosened dagger from the cultist's grip. The cult fanatic wasn't fast enough to stop the eagle as it soared away with the dagger in its talons. Zeus flew overhead, through the tall cavern, passing over Ulagon, who roared at his followers to stop the bird and continue the summoning at all cost. Zeus hadn't quite made it back to Clotho when... The arcane eagle vanished out of existence as the cult fanatic's firebolt struck true. The bronze dagger fell from above, clattering to the floor, flipping end over end, until it clattered to a stop. All eyes turned to it. But Ulagon was the fastest. He ran to the dagger, seized it, and then with one misty step, he vanished and teleported back to the cult fanatic, handing him the dagger so that he could continue the summoning. Mebo then called out, "Yenna next," as he stared Ferox down, who had tunnel visioned on the bard this entire time. Mebo's cry inspired his fellow cultists to do what needed to be done. The cult priest healed the cult fanatic, who was doing the important work of summoning their leader back, as the spiritual, ethereal hammer continued to move about, swinging at anyone it could reach. The party's own cleric, Lucifer, was on full-time healing duty, popping back into consciousness all those who fell from the cultists' attacks. This included Grim for a second time, Kumi once. Even Clotho was dangerously close to death's door. And as the battle wore on, Layla fell for the cultists, and the cult priest was nearing death himself, as the group continued to whittle down those they could, kicking sleeping and awake cultists alike into the fire as they passed. The cultist screams echoed around the chamber, ricocheting off the walls, adding to the cacophony of the battle. Ulagon tried to take out as many of the party as he could, by sending a second lightning bolt through their midst. But this time, Clotho was ready for it. And with a well-timed incantation, she was able to counter the spell, stopping the attack before it could even be released. From there, 2 eldritch blasts were loosed from Oriana's tiefling hands. The first struck the cult fanatic, and then the second struck true as well. And with that, Oriana watched from the other side of the cavern as the cult fanatic dropped the dagger, about to fall into unconsciousness and stop the resurrection of Ulagon for good. Excited cheers went up, Ferox jumped in joy, but their celebration was premature. Across Mebo's lips spread a smile. That familiar, annoying smirk of a smile. A smile like that meant the bard knew something the group didn't. Mebo spoke some words in Infernal, and through the powers bestowed to him by the devil Fiona, the cult fanatic clung to life and stood again, loyal beyond death. Picking up the dagger, he began the incantation, charging it and Yenna with evil energies. The group now had mere seconds before the cult fanatic would complete the incantation and plunge the dagger into Yenna's heart, killing her instantly. The mad rush was on. 6 seconds to save Ferox's love. Everyone dropped all other thoughts and rushed to do what they could to kill the cult fanatic. Ferox took a parting slice from Mebo as she ran towards Yenna, but she hadn't moved since the start of the fight, and Yenna was too far away. She couldn't get there in time. Eldritch blasts were shot at the cultist. One hit, a second missed, but the cult priest healed the cult fanatic for what he could. And as the seconds drew through an eternity, every single one of them did whatever they could think of. Some were still unconscious, being healed by Lucifer, but those that were awake shot arrows and flung spells at the cult fanatic. Some attacks hit, others missed. But he was getting bloodied and bruised. They were almost there. He was almost down. But then, time ran out. Yenna turned to see Ferox, running madly for her, transforming into a bear to try to reach her in time. But there was no time left. And so Yenna, with a parting smile to her love and words whispered unheard, closed her eyes in peace as the cult fanatic plunged the bronze dagger through her heart. The group was helpless as they watched Yenna's life energy leave her body, floating along ethereal currents all the way to Ulagon. He absorbed the energy, taking in its power, just as he had with the previous sacrifice. Stunned disbelief, hatred, anguish engulfed everyone in the group. In their fury, they cut down the remaining unnamed cultists in a flurry of attacks. Ferox, in her bear form, tore the cult fanatic limb from limb, ripping his arm clean from his body. Clotho counterspelled Ulagon's third lightning bolt to keep them safe. And even though Yenna was gone, the cult was dying. Watching everyone fall around him, Mebo knew the battle was lost. And so, the bard looked to the bear form of Ferox and said,
"Sorry about Yenna. Too bad things didn't work out between you two.
I think it's time I take my leave." Clotho, having been so intent on stopping Ulagon's lightning bolt, wasn't able to stop Mebo from leaving as he cast Dimension Door and teleported far, far away from the losing battle, abandoning Ulagon in the process. Ulagon was furious at this and roared at Mebo to return, but he could do nothing to stop the bard. And with all the other cultists dead around him, Ulagon was now alone. And though he was strengthened by Yenna's death, he was still severely injured from the battle. All 7 party members bore down on the evil mage, hitting him with attack after attack after attack, until, as a group, they were able to finally vanquish the evil mage. Since Ulagon hadn't been completely resurrected, there was nothing to show for his defeat. No body, no blood. He was just gone. The cultists were dead, Mebo had fled, and 5 more Vehsens had lost their lives to a meaningless summoning, a pitiful attempt of one individual to gain immortality at the expense of others. Quiet descended. A thick, heavy quiet, like that from the wake of a hurricane, and the desolation it leaves behind. Only the crackle of the fire, still burning in a pit, filled the void. Ferox transformed back into her dragonborn self and released Yenna from her binds. Sinking to the ground, she held her deceased love in her lap, crying for the one who was gone and the moments that would never be. The group freed the other core, and Yamin, Nithni, and her grandparents joined Ferox. And together, their voices echoed around the chamber as they sang a prayer to Malora, a song that had been so special to Ferox and Yenna. The others gave the family space as they mourned, and eventually the monks arrived from the monastery, having come on Sagho's orders, and seeing that the battle was done, they tended to the bodies. A somber mood hovered over the group for the next couple of days. The outcome was bittersweet. They had saved the village, prevented the return of Ulagon, stopped the cult of Fierna, which all allowed the other Vehsen tribe members to return to Sagho. But Mebo had escaped, and Yenna was dead. They all stayed for the funeral, the misfit adventurers who had been brought together in a tournament by chance, coincidence, and a common awkwardness, who had accepted a noble quest and traveled together to Reykjavik Mountain to help those in need. Even though it had come at a steep price, they had done a good job. But now, it was time for them to go about their own lives. And so, the group departed from Sagho, each of them going their own way. Clotho and Oriana decided to stay together and see what adventures would come to them next. Clotho also returned back to the Silver Scythe to take the scrying scroll from Mebo's office as one final snub to the bard. Lucifer and Kumi stayed together, as had been the way before all of this. Kumi picked up his commissioned Devil Stinger dagger before they left, and returned to his rogue order of the White Mask. Grim and Carrick departed solo. Grim returned to his hometown, while Carrick went back to wandering aimlessly through the lands. She would eventually randomly stumble into another adventure, just as she had initially stumbled into the tournament a few weeks ago. Ferox was the last to leave Sagho. She stayed back a while, taking time with the family to grieve, getting to know more about Yenna and her past, but it did little to comfort her in her grief. The once loving, carefree Dragonborn now had vengeance filling her heart. She eventually bid farewell to the Vehsens and set out in search of the bard who had killed her love. She didn't know how long it would take. She didn't know where it would take her. But she would track down Mebo and make him pay. That was a promise. What Ferox didn't know right now was that not all hope was lost. In Alkmaar, all things are possible. I hope you enjoyed Story of the Game's debut arc. I aim to have the second arc ready and available for you around autumn of this year. But if you can't wait until then and want more fun content, I'll provide it completely free of charge. All you have to do is sign up for my email list at dwolfsbane.com and get others to download and listen to Story of the Game on any platform. With even as few as 20 new subscribers on my website or 100 downloads of the entire 5-episode arc, I will create and post new content. Visit dwolfsbane.com to sign up, and while there, check out all my stretch goals, which include things like a full blooper reel from this arc, a Q&A session made up of your questions, a one-off episode that features adventures running through my closest macabre carnival of madness, and if we manage to reach the final goal post, I'll even write up the Mykolis campaign and post it on DM's Guild so you can play through the game with your friends. Hey, if you really enjoy all of this, perhaps I'll even move up my timeline and create even more content than I already have in the works. Please tell others about Story of the Game and share the love. Thank you so much for listening and joining me on this journey through the Disappearing Debacle arc. Remember to sign up for notifications so that you know exactly when the next episode and arc are coming out. This is D. Wolfsbane, and this is Story of the Game. I'm gonna end it there.